Welcome back to the Manor Entropians. Julian McBain here, and today we're going to be continuing our Personal Finance for Gamers series, talking about assets versus liabilities. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Manor. Please take a moment and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. Also, please consider going over to patreon.com/JulianMcBain if you want to support my work. If you do, you can get a hold of my ebook, The Modern Entropia, which goes through all of the professions of Entropia universe and how each profession may or may not make you money in our wonderful real cash economy game. I would also like to give a huge shout out to my patron, Red Kryptonite, who has supported me for 3 months. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Okay. Assets versus liabilities. As you build yourself up in your personal finances, there will come a time for you to start looking at building assets and hedging liabilities. So, as a rule, assets are how people overcome the middle class problem. What is the middle class problem? The middle class problem is where you start to accumulate. As your income goes up, you start to accumulate debt that counterbalances that income. That's the long and the short of it. The majority of people in the middle class, they have an amount of debt that servicing the debt counterbalances a large proportion of their income. Because a lot of the things that we view as assets in the middle class, and I'm as guilty as anyone, I'm in the middle class, and I didn't discover this rule until about 1.5 years ago. And it took me a while to figure out why and how it worked and the reasons behind it. But the things we're told are assets in the middle class really aren't long-term assets. They have functions of assets, and they are important. But a lot of the things we think of as assets are liabilities. And so I'm going to go through what true assets are, what true liabilities are, and the definition of a luxury. What true assets are, what true liabilities are, and the definition of a luxury. Because you need to understand these three concepts if you're going to overcome the middle class problem when you get there. And you may be there now, and if you are, awesome. And you may have gotten past this point, and if you are, that's awesome too. So first off, let's talk about assets. The blanket definition of an asset is a source of income that does not involve you trading hours for dollars. An asset is something that creates a source of income that is not trading hours for dollars. The most well-known assets are the ones that I mentioned in my previous video, Intro to Real-Life Investments. These are your stocks, your bonds, mutual funds, real estate, things that produce income or provide capital gains over long term. Other things that can be classified as an asset are businesses, whether you're working the business directly or not. Businesses are by definition an asset because, yes, you have to put your 40 or 50 or even 70 hours worth of work in at your business, but you're not being paid hourly for it. You're being paid, if you're the business owner, you're being paid for the results. You're not being paid for the hours worked. And that is something that a lot of people misunderstand about, C-suite professionals and things like that. They're not paid for hours worked. They're paid for results. And I'm going to get into that in the skills section of this, but we're going to talk about standard investments for a few minutes. Why is an investment an asset? Well, the easy ones are to think about are stocks. People think of this as passive sources of income. This is a really short-sighted way to look at it. I mean, technically speaking, it is mostly true. You buy it, it just produces income. But you do have to watch it. You do have to do some administrative things. You can't just, let it go and expect it to perform all the time. It's not the way it works. There is going to be some sort of administrative action that you have to take on such things. But it doesn't require a lot of action on your part. It requires a little action on your part, relatively speaking. Basically, if you have to put like 4 hours a month in, it's an asset, not a job. If you're putting 4 hours a day in, then it's a job. And there is a place in there that's kind of splitting the difference, and this is one of those things that you have to kind of balance out in your mind. Where do you want the line to be? Also, on real estate as an asset versus a job, I'm going to get into this one specifically because this is one that can be both. Coming from a family that has in the past been invested in real estate, not a lot of real estate, but we tried doing it as a side hustle, basically we tried doing all the management ourselves. And for the most part, it worked. But when an apartment was empty, we had to do all the renovations ourselves. That's when it becomes a job. And you can still do really well having real estate being your job. And there'll be weeks where you don't have to do anything, and there'll be weeks where you're working 80 hours a week. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at that point, it's no longer, while the buildings themselves are technically assets, it's also your job. And so it kind of subsumes your life. If you want it to be more of an asset where it produces money, you're not putting a whole lot of work in, you have to hire a management company. It's just the way it is. Does that cut into the overall profits? Kind of, sort of, but not really, because you're no longer investing the time. No, you can make money. You can't make time. You can't manufacture time. So it's an asset when it produces something that does not take your time. It's a job when it produces something that does take your time, or a significant part of your time. So these are things to think about with that particular asset. Another form of asset, and this is something that you may have to use to start out, it might involve trading hours for dollars, but can be turned into something more, are skills. Skills are something that, one, can never be taken away from you. Generally get better over time as long as you're utilizing them. Everyone can acquire, no matter what your starting income level or, where you are in life. And most importantly, can be utilized to better your circumstances. And I want to talk about the one that most people don't think about, because you can learn how to sell, you can learn how to close, you can learn how to manage money, you can learn how to design widgets, you can become an engineer, you can become a doctor. Skills are the earning potential of a skill is based upon the rarity of the skill, your level in the skill, and the needs of the market for that skill. So let's talk about some skills that are not considered high income. Housekeeping. Housekeeping is not a difficult thing to do. It's not an easy job, but it's not a difficult skill to learn. That's why housekeeping is not does not earn a huge amount of money. Now, to the person buying the skill off the housekeeper, because that's what people do. People buy your skills, whether you're trading hours for dollars or you're trading results for dollars. And I'm going to get into that here in a minute. When you go to a job, someone is purchasing your skill for an agreed upon price. That's all it comes down to. If it's a skill that everyone can learn in a very short amount of time, it's going to have a lower price. That doesn't mean the job isn't necessary. That doesn't mean the job isn't important. And it doesn't mean the job is not dignified. Every job, having a job, doing meaningful work is the most important thing that you can have. But if you want to earn more, you have to refine your skills to the point where it's worth more. And that's not always easy. Or you need to learn additional skills to supplement them to make your skill set more valuable. So let's take the most common skill that everyone has out there, or everyone could have out there, and that's customer service. Customer service is largely the most maligned skill set in existence. People think of it as very basic. And strictly speaking, it is kind of basic. It doesn't take long for someone to figure out how to be polite to people, even when those people are being complete assholes. Self-control is a skill that's important. But here's the difference. Largely speaking, people see customer service as transactional. You're dealing with them over a single transaction, you're helping them find a single item, you're being polite with them, and they move on and you forget about them. But customer service can become high income. Yeah, roll that around in your head for a minute. Customer service can become high income. How does customer service become high income? Well, over time, you start to see the same customers. And they come into your place of business every single day. They buy the same things. This is especially true in a place like a convenience store. When I worked in convenience, and I did it for 5 years, I managed convenience stores for 5 years. I was a grocer for pretty much 10. People start to get to know your name, and you get to know their names, and you know what they want before they walk in the door. Well, they're no longer customers, now they're clients. You're no longer engaged in customer service, you're in relationship management. See, it's the same skill set, but has a lot of deeper meaning to the people that you're working with. This is when people come into a business looking for you specifically. When people come in and they start asking for you by name to help them, now you've moved from customer service to relationship management. Relationship management produces a lot of results. People see results and they want you to continue producing results, and so they will turn around and give you more money for that skill. And this takes a long time to develop. This is not something you develop overnight. And here is where something like customer service can turn into a high value skill. See, most people think that something like customer service is strictly speaking hours for dollars. And when you start out, that's the way it's going to be because that's how you learn. It's kind of like being an apprentice at a trade. You're trading hours for dollars. But there are other jobs that utilize that skill that are based on commission. Or you might have an hourly rate, but you also have an incentive structure that is based on your results. Now you're trading results for dollars. When you trade results for dollars, it doesn't matter how long it takes you to get those results, you still make the money. So for instance, I work in sales. Therefore, I'm on commission. If I make 4 sales, I earn the same amount whether I make those 4 sales in an hour or if I make them over the course of 8 hours. I'm not trading hours for dollars, I'm trading results for dollars. And sales, 90% of sales, especially in a lot of your non-transactional, it's all relationship management. It's all customer service. It's all figuring out what they need and solving problems for them. That's the definition of a skill. And that's when a skill becomes an asset. Now, full disclosure, I'm still on the lower edge of that curve. I'm into relationship management, but I'm figuring out how to refine that relationship management to really produce. But I've had mentors who have shown me the way. And if that's the route you're going to go, that's a good route for you to take. Find someone who can talk to you and coach you through developing the skill set to become better at that skill. And it doesn't matter what skill it is. Find the skill that you want to refine. Find someone who can coach you. Do the job. And it might mean trading hours for dollars for years, but you will get there. That's when a skill becomes an asset. A third asset that you want to think about is intellectual property. Intellectual property. Intellectual property is also an asset. Now, the value of that asset is based upon your ability to turn that intellectual property into dollars. Sometimes that's easy. Sometimes that's hard. The point is if you put the effort in, you have the intellectual property. And they can't take that intellectual property away from you. patent system aside, where there's a limit to how long you can protect something, people can't take that intellectual property away from you. And the best part is, if you don't patent something, you can classify it as a trade secret. Trade secrets can never be taken from you so long as they remain secret. And there are trade secret laws to protect you in case someone steals the idea from you. You just have to have documentation. Which I know, ironically, makes it easier for people to steal it from you, but as long as it's documented and dated, then you have evidence that, hey, no, that's mine and you stole it. Okay. We've gone through assets, now let's talk about liability. Liability is anything that takes money away from you. Anything that you have to spend money on. And we're going to talk about some things that people think of as liabilities but that don't need to be. And we're going to talk about things that are liabilities that people think of as assets. First off, the most common liability anyone has is debt. Debt is something that we all have some form of debt. There's no getting around it. It's pretty much how the world works. It's just determining how well you service that debt determines where you are going to be in the social strata. Now, ironically, the people with the least amount of money are generally the people with no debt. A lot of people in that financial situation are cash and carry. They don't carry debt, but they also don't carry a lot of assets. And unfortunately, in order to be able to make it past a certain point, you've got to utilize debt in a system called cash flow. And I'm going to get into that shortly. But debt doesn't have to be a liability. If you are paying debt using money earned from a job, whether it's results-based or hours-based, if you're paying debt using money earned from a job, that debt is a liability. Period. Dot. If the debt you hold is paid for by an underlying asset, it is not a liability. So, for instance, you buy a rental property. This is why I talked about real estate earlier. You buy a rental property. The money from the rents on the rental property pay the mortgage on that property. That mortgage is not a liability. It zeroes out. It's supported by the asset that it is funding, the underlying asset. It is no longer a liability. If it's something that is more consumable, like a vehicle, if there is an asset that supports the complete payment for that debt, so let's say you purchase a car. The car costs you $40,000. So you lease it, and the lease costs you $300 a month. And I know that math is a little off. Let's call it $350. Okay, $40,000 vehicle, $350 a month. That speaks to some pretty good credit, but the payment is being completely paid for by an asset you already possess, say real estate, or better yet, bond income. You have bonds set up. It's part of your portfolio, and it produces enough to pay the lease all year round. Now, it might not be that it directly comes out every month and you put it in every month, but the point is that the total amount coming out of the bonds counterbalances the total annual payment of the lease or the loan payment. Now, that car is no longer a liability. It's now a luxury. When the debt for an item is completely paid for by an asset, or when an asset just outright purchases an item, it's no longer a liability. It's a luxury. Because you're not working for it. Not really. You have to do some admin stuff. But it's not coming out of your 9 to 5. That's the definition of a luxury. It's a liability that is completely paid for by an asset. Now, let's talk about that car. Your car is a liability. Doesn't matter how nice the car is, doesn't matter what the car does. Why? Well, you have to trade off on what it's going to do. It's either a new car and you've got a loan or a lease on it, and that's going to cost you money every month. Or it's an older car and you got to fix the damn thing. And very few paid off cars don't have maintenance problems. You might get 1 or 2 years out of it before you start experiencing something breaking down. Because that's the nature of the beast. It's not even that they design it that way. Parts wear out. Road salt wears away at the frame. If you're in a state that uses road salt or a country that uses road salt in the winter. For those of you who are in places that experience real winter. If you're near the coast, the salt from the ocean will wear away at the body. It can rust things out. Things decay. Cars decay. Parts need replacing. Your vehicle is a liability. Period. Dot. Unless it is something that is directly making you money, like if you're a taxi driver, then your car's an asset because it's producing money for you more than its decay will cause you. That's different. You know, if you're doing Uber, if you're doing DoorDash, or if you're doing, if you're an old or a true taxi driver or a bus driver, whatever, then your vehicle is an asset because it's producing money. But generally speaking, your car is a liability. It's a necessary liability. And it's a necessary liability because that's how you get to work. That's how you go buy food. See, just because it's a liability doesn't mean it's not necessary or it's not important to have. My computer is a liability, but it's an important liability for me because this is how I make my videos. Once the videos that I make produce enough income to offset the computer, then it becomes an asset. Or possibly more technically, a luxury. And that's another thing. The difference between a luxury and an asset in that particular case is if you're using it to produce income, it's not a luxury, it's an asset. If it's got an underlying asset, or if it's a liability that produces income, once it gets over the threshold of producing more than it costs, it's an asset, not a luxury, because you're not using it for funsies, you're using it for work. And that can swing back and forth. Like if you can have something like Global 72 Ped, very nice. Like my computer. I'm a YouTuber. If I were to retire and it were still producing income, that computer's an asset. I stop producing videos, it stops producing income, but the income already paid for the computer, well, now that computer's a luxury. See where that can kind of swing the line? It's complicated. Another liability that most people think of as an asset, because it's kind of a hybrid, is your primary residence. Let's talk about primary residences for a minute. The so-called American dream has always been to own a home. And largely speaking, that's a really good dream to have. But people need to understand that a home is, by definition, a liability. And this is part of the middle class problem. We're told that your primary residence is an asset. That's how the middle class builds wealth. You buy a home, you buy it on a mortgage. Over time, it builds equity because you can always turn around, sell the house, and get whatever you put into it out of it, for the most part. The problem is regardless of how nice the home is, unless the market climbs while you own the home, if you buy a home for $100,000 and you sell the home for $100,000, that house has cost you money. Why does it cost you money? You have the real estate broker fees, you have the mortgage broker fees, you have the interest paid on the mortgage while you held the home. These things have cost you money. And you still have to keep a roof on it. So if the roof gets damaged, that's on you. You have to replace the furnace when it breaks. These are things that cost money. And the home doesn't produce money for you. That does not make the home unimportant. But when you're going through deciding how you want to create your living arrangements, these are things that are important to keep in mind. Now, personally, I am someone who eventually wants to own a home. I have no illusions about the fact that that house will be a liability in my life unless it's paid for by underlying assets, at which point it becomes, ding, a luxury. But this is also why there are a lot of your more wealthy people who own condos instead. Because a lot of the things that a homeowner would have to worry about are dealt with by the condo association. Yes, you have to pay the condo association a management fee, but it's no different than rent. It's a hybrid between renting and buying. And in the long run, it can mean that you're paying less over time. It's also why there are people who own a boatload of real estate but rent their apartment from someone else. Because yes, they have a management company dealing with their real estate. They pay a landlord, so when something breaks, they make a phone call. It's not their problem. Pretty curious, right? And yes, I do know people who do this. In fact, I had a landlord that used to do this. He ended up moving into one of his own houses. But when I was in Bismarck, I had a landlord that, talked to me about getting into real estate. And he's like, when I started out, I bought a property, I rented it out, and I rented an apartment. Because then he only had to worry about the things that were producing money for him, not something that was costing him money. So, that is assets and liabilities. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share. Oh, if you have any questions, comment below and I will try to answer them. This is a more complicated, this is a much more complex concept when it comes to personal finance. And I'm hoping I got through everything for you, but I know that it's not necessarily something that's easy to, it's not always easy to get the first time around. And if I'm unclear, it can make things a lot worse. So if I'm unclear on anything, please comment below. I will try to address the issue. And if I don't know something, I will let you know about it. Because I know that this is something that I'm still building skills in. Like, I understand all the concepts. I get what it means. But this is a skill that takes a long time to learn. And it's something that takes a lot of effort to figure out. So I'll help you as much as I can, but I'm not going to pretend that I have figured it all out, because if I had figured it all out, I'd be rich, and I'm not. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. We are on the road to 13 million subscribers, one subscription at a time, so make sure you subscribe. As always, thank you for all your support. You have a wonderful day.